My show today, as always, is all about people, recognising that it really is okay to not be okay. So turn up your radio. And I'm reconnecting with a gal who came onto my path earlier this year, beating more than a drum around men's issues. Cassie Jaye, she's a 31-year-old San Franciscan filmmaker, and she found herself in the eye of an Australian media storm because of her controversial film, which chronicles her journey through the polarising men's rights movement. The bitter sore point seemed to be that in the course of making the documentary, she'd begun questioning some of her own feminist beliefs. They cancelled screenings, angry protests and boycotts in the months before Cassie arrived here in Australia, and the combative interviews on the project and Weekend Sunrise after she sat down on the Gold Coast, and I spent some time with her there for the International Conference on Men's Issues. So thank you so much for daring to engage again with the Australian media, Cassie. Screenings of the film went ahead in New South Wales, Victoria and Queensland and South Australia. And I can hear you laughing. So thank God we've connected, because you're talking to me all the way from Los Angeles, United States of America. There you go.
Yes, well, I'm glad to be here. Thanks for inviting me on, and I won't hold you responsible for the actions of other Australian media sources. So This is a clean slate. I'm glad to be here.
Oh, what a bloody disgrace! But we'll get to that. We'll get to that later. But your film, made all by yourself with the input of your mum and your boyfriend, and contrary to popular belief, I believe Donald Trump had nothing to do with funding the movie.
Oh, no. Oh, God. Not a popular belief, because it's terrible if it is. Wow.
Yes. We have heard that, though. We have heard that there was funding from Donald Trump. So.
Oh, my gosh. You know, it's worse than that game Telephone or I mean, it's ridiculous how much these lies can snowball.
Yes.
But no, and the film was released before the U.S. election, the presidential election. So any people saying that this was somehow trying to ride coattails of whoever won the presidency it had nothing to do with that. So
yeah. Well, look, I'm thrilled to have you on the show, and even more thrilled that we're actually speaking technologically. But many people who are listening into the show today have watched The Red Pill, but there are so many people that haven't been introduced to it. So would you mind just painting me a little picture of how The Red Pill came about and what it means?
Sure. So it was in 2013. I was looking for the topic of my next feature documentary film. I thought I was going to make a film on rape culture. So I started researching rape culture, and that's when I stumbled across a website called A Voice for Men. And this website at the time, it was the largest and fastest growing men's rights kind of online forum and community. The mainstream media wasn't really covering them at that time, and there wasn't much information about them. But of the little information I could find from bloggers or any kind of media sources, they were telling me that the men's rights movement, and especially Voice for Men, was a hate group, and that they were misogynists, and that they were wanting women back in the kitchen barefoot and pregnant with the inability to vote and all these things. And so I thought, okay, so these are the people perpetuating rape culture, and these are the people who are perpetuating the war on women. And so my feminist mind was thinking, all right, I'm going to expose the people who are preventing women's equality. And so I contacted the president and founder of A Voice for Men. His name is Paul Elam. And I persuaded him to let me make a documentary featuring him, interviewing him, and then him leading me to other men's rights activists that were prominent voices in the movement to interview. And his mentality was any press is good press, and even though they've only had bad press, but it's getting their title out there for people to go look for themselves what they have to say about these issues. And so I spent a year filming men's rights activists as well as feminists, because I wanted to go to other people who are against
having the balanced view, which is so very important when we're tackling these highly volatile and sensitive issues.
Yeah. So and what was supposed to be a fly on the wall documentary, where I'm just simply letting the camera roll and letting these people speak for their own movement. That was my intention, was to make a fly on the wall documentary. But I ended up going on a life-changing journey myself, and ever since I was 18 years old, I'm now 31, but ever since I was 18, I've kept a video diary, and so while I was filming the Red Pill movie, I continued keeping my video diary.
Cassie,
Mhm.
you're just cutting out every now and then. I'm thinking that to get the best quality for this interview, because it's what you're talking about is just so very important. I'm Rae Bonney, where it really is okay to not be okay. I'm absolutely thrilled to have again on a new connection the fabulous Cassie Jaye. She's a feminist filmmaker who set out to document the mysteries and polarising world of the men's right movement, but begun to question her own feminist beliefs. The much acclaimed movie The Red Pill chronicles Cassie Jaye's journey exploring an alternative perspective on gender equality, power and privilege. So welcome back, Cassie.
Thanks for having me.
Now, we did get to the point where we were sort of embarking on your journey through your own words around your making of The Red Pill. And how many years did that take?
Total for the film was 3.5 years,
Mm.
and now it's been 4.5 years since I started the filming process, so it's been a while, yeah.
Well, do you know, it came onto my path earlier this year. I think it was probably around March when Bettina Arndt called me and she said, Rae, I need your help. We can't get this bloody film screened. In fact, it's being ripped off the screens, literally, in such a terrible way that people need to be hearing about men's issues.
Yeah.
So that's when I jumped on it.
Well, I'm glad you guys connected, so you could have a successful screening.
We did. In fact, I had 200 people to Hoyt's cinema here in Melbourne Central, which was great. I mean, they were one of the cinemas that really did get on board, and they had a lot of screenings around Australia without any drama at all.
That's great. Yeah, I'm really glad that it went through. I mean, so many screenings in Australia were canceled, and they were sold-out screenings, and the theaters pulled the film right before they were supposed to screen because protesters were petitioning against the theaters and threatening them and going to their review pages online and writing bad reviews if they dared to screen the Red Pill movie. I mean, it was really, I don't think I can blame these theaters for pulling the film from their screens because they were under attack by the protesters.
Yes,
they
well, one of the cinemas is they're friends of mine actually, and I spoke to them about it, and they were receiving death threats.
Wow.
Which when you're thinking about what the Red Pill is demonstrating and just bringing to light some issues or the many issues around what it might be like being a man, it's hardly criminal, is it?
Yeah, I think if this film didn't have such an impact and have this kind of reaction, then maybe I would be looking back thinking, well, maybe the men's rights activists were overreacting and there's not some big war on men talking about their issues. Maybe I would have just thought they were overreacting or making a mountain out of a molehill. But I mean, the reaction to the film, I think, is even more telling than the film itself, that there is a societal problem with addressing men's issues. Why can't we talk about this? And why, if you try to talk about these issues, do people react in this way?
Yeah, well, I mean, you've been knee-deep, eyeball-deep in this for many years now. What do you think is the greatest source of fear, Cassie, for people?
Oh, man, that's a big question.
Yeah. Well, that's where it seems to stem from, though, doesn't it? It's like fear, like the fear that, if we watch this movie called The Red Pill, that all of a sudden women are going to be in danger. That's some of the feedback that I've heard.
Yeah, and I think I had that fear as well about the men's rights movement, where I didn't know anything about them going into it, but I thought these people were against women's equality, and if we give them any kind of platform or sunlight, they're going to, basically have a campaign against women's rights, and that was my fear about the men's rights movement. And so for people who haven't seen the Red Pill movie, but they're adamantly against it, I think that's their fear too, that it's somehow against women's equality, but it's not. And that's what was so enlightening about making this film and meeting all the men's rights activists is they are not what the mainstream media says they are, and what they are about are really valid issues, but they don't get to talk about them because the lies about them is what gets the airtime.
Mm. Oh, absolutely. I mean, I sit in this space every single day of my life and hear, have the absolute privilege of hearing men's stories and what it feels like being a man. And, it's not about, I don't feel it's not about men not being able to speak or not being able to express. It's that men don't have safe places or environments where they can express. And, I think your movie has created that platform where, now we've got some tangible pieces we can attach to really talk about some of these issues, especially like suicide. Cassie, you know this as well as I do, but not a lot of people do, that every minute of every day in the world, another man dies from suicide.
Wow.
And we're doing nothing. Nothing.
And why that is, really is an issue that I think stands from all the rest of any gender issues out there is because suicide is a symptom of something larger going on. This is the result of something much larger that's happening to so many people. And I mean, think of all the people who have almost gotten to that point but didn't go as far as committing suicide. But here we have all these people that do commit suicide every minute of every day. And that's, a small fraction of all the people that are feeling like they want to. And I think that's, if we're talking about an epidemic of some sorts, look at the people who want to take their lives and start asking yourself, like, what's going on in our society that would make these people, this demographic, want to do that.
And I think that your movie raises some of these issues that men are facing where, when you're pushed against the wall and you've got nowhere to go and no purpose to live, that seems to be the result. And there is so much that can be done to minimise and reduce these risks to people, because this isn't everybody's issue, isn't it, Cassie? This is not the way that you're painting it as well, it's not a gender issue. Would you agree?
Well, I think there's definitely issues that uniquely affect men and uniquely affect women. And then there's also so many issues that affect everyone, like suicide, because this obviously affects the loved ones that are left behind. And, war deaths, obviously that affects families as well and society's cultures. But there are unique men's issues, too, as well as there are unique women's issues. So, for instance, paternity fraud. A woman will never know the pain of raising a child that you later figure out or find out was not your own biological child.
Yep.
But you feel like they are because you spent 16 years raising them every day and loving them like your own. And then you find out.
Or a whole family of them that's so depicted in your movie, that instance of a father who had an entire family of children that weren't biologically.
Yeah. And I never even heard the term paternity fraud before I started making this film, and yet I was a feminist of 10 years before making the Red Pill movie, but I never heard of this term, paternity fraud, and I think that is a gender issue. It affects one gender, and I think we need to talk about it, and regardless of how many instances of this are out in the world, if it happens to one person, it is, I'm sure, a life-altering problem that should be looked at, and people should have compassion for people in that situation.
Yes, and I love that you put such amazing or different lenses on issues, and I've seen the episode of The Project that has been very much talked about, and hopefully this isn't vicariously traumatizing you, Cassie, talking about your appearance on The Project or Sunrise, but the piece that you talk about when Rosie Batty's incident was brought up into your face very quickly, and not being Australian and not having lived here, of course you're not across our news, so not knowing about that, but you recognising that the Rosie Batty situation was another example of a male that died in domestic violence, and they didn't get it. They just didn't get it.
Yeah, and I got a lot of flack for my comments about that from the project, the people writing about me pointing out that the victim was male, the person that was killed was male. And I mean, there's so many things I could say about the case or my comments in the project, and I think a few things that I wish I had enough time to say or wish I had more information about this case to be able to talk about on the project, because I never heard of that case before I was interviewed on the project. But one thing I want to say is that I didn't know the age of the son, and in my mind, he could have been 25 years old, and he was killed by the father. So it wasn't a adult versus child thing in my mind, whereas it sounded like the project hosts, they said that children are always factored into domestic violence and abuse. But when you talk about domestic violence shelters, at least in the U.S. and also in the U.K., there are many domestic violence shelters that will not allow a boy that is over 9, 10, 11 years old into that shelter. And that is a rule. And so, I think there absolutely is discrimination happening against male victims of domestic violence, including children.
Yes.
Male boys, children.
I've heard you talk about that a lot around the discrimination there. And you cited an incident when you were speaking at the National Coalition for Men recently about a boy who was violated by his father and was taken into a shelter.
Yes, yeah, because in the United States there are over 2,000 domestic violence shelters that accept female victims, but there's only one domestic violence shelter as of a couple of years ago that is for male victims. And so I interviewed the founder of that all-men's shelter, and it was a woman who founded it, and I asked her what types of people are coming into your shelter seeking refuge, and what are their stories. And so she told me that the first bed she gave was to a 16-year-old boy whose father pulled a gun on him and put it up to his head. And his father had PTSD, and he was a war veteran. And the 16-year-old boy, he was alone at his house with his dad. He didn't have a mother, he didn't have other family, and he didn't want to tell his friends what was going on. So either his option was to sleep under a bridge or on the street or something like that, or find refuge, which thankfully in this state had one shelter. And well, and actually in the whole country, there's one shelter. So
because there's one in the whole world, isn't there?
Sorry?
A shelter for men for domestic violence. There's only one.
And I don't think in the whole world. I think other countries have a couple. Have you heard that?
Well, not really. Again, in my space, when you're speaking to men about connecting them to pathways of support, it's really slim pickings. And again, it's just ludicrous that you can think about, the human condition being in these situations of such utter vulnerability and being so discriminated against because you're a male. I still don't get it.
It is an interesting onion to start pulling the layers off of, because I so often try to tap into my old feminist brain before making the Red Pill movie and try to think, why did I have such an ingrained bias against accepting that males could be victims of domestic violence?
Okay, well,
because I made up all these...
Can you just stay with that just for a moment then? You asked yourself that question. Why was it that you were so ingrained? Like, what do you think? Is it social narrative? Is it media? Is it, how we're brought up with our belief and value systems? What is it that is convincing us that this is a real issue or not an issue?
Oh, do you want me to go?
Yeah, that was a question.
I thought we were going to a commercial break or something.
No.
That's a good cliffhanger. Okay, so I try to tap into my old feminist mindset and wonder what kind of biases I had about men being victims, and I would commonly excuse that there are no shelters for male victims because I was thinking that either most men, on average, controlled the finances, and this was obviously a very kind of 1950s way of me to think about marriage and relationships. But I was under the impression that, well, men had access to the bank account, and maybe many women don't, and so a woman, if she doesn't have access to funds, she would need to find a shelter because she couldn't go to a hotel or find some other kind of place if she doesn't have family to run to. And so I was making this excuse in my mind that, well, men on average do have control of the finances, so they can find a hotel if they need one. And that was, now looking back, I can't believe how sexist that thinking is, because here I was a feminist saying that, you know, we should all be equal, including in being breadwinners and in the job force and everything. And there are plenty of relationships and couples I know where I live in the San Francisco area that many women are the breadwinners. So, and then another kind of, I guess, sexist way of viewing domestic violence that I had was that, well, men on average are larger and can defend themselves against a woman harming them, or it wouldn't hurt them as bad because they're larger and stronger, or she couldn't really hurt them as bad because she's weaker on average. Again, very sexist kind of views of this. And then it took a men's rights activist telling me, actually a female men's rights activist telling me, her name is Erin Pizzi, she founded the first women's shelter in the UK,
sure did,
well, in the world, but it was in the UK. And she's now a big advocate for men's rights and men's issues. And she told me weapons are the great equalizer. And how, because when she started the first women's shelter in 1971, she saw that 61 or 62 out of the first 100 women that entered her refuge were just as violent as the men they left, including violent towards their children. And but they were violent to the men in their lives, and they used weapons. They used knives, pots, pans, brooms, chairs, anything. So that was really eye-opening for me. And obviously my whole kind of red pill process took many years of starting to add up the pieces to finally get to understanding what men's rights activists were telling me. But I started to see it in the media and see it in TV shows where it would be the butt of the joke if the woman was hitting the man or throwing things at the guy. And if she found out he was cheating and she starts throwing things at him, you know, mercilessly. And then I started to wonder what would be the public's reaction if it was if the genders were reversed, if she had been cheating on him and then he started just throwing anything he could find around the house at her. How would the public react? And it wouldn't be the same kind of comedic relief as these shows were trying to make it.
Not at all. When we're talking about this narrative, and you know, and my question too was, how do you get to the point where we're just so seduced by, you know, public opinion, and it comes through things like, you know, media, but also, you know, music and storytelling. You know, and we're going to go to a break just for a moment because I have a perfect example, and a very good friend, Bettina Arndt, reminded me of this song many months ago when she said, just take a listen to this. You know, this is the stuff that we allow into our children's, you know, worlds to listen to, that we get seduced by. And Pink, I don't know if you're a fan of Pink.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Well, here's one from Pink. Now, whilst we go on the break, Cassie, I want you to listen very carefully to the lyrics and everyone else who's listening to these lyrics. And just imagine if this song was produced and recorded by a male, I wonder if it would be released onto our into our airwaves. What did you think of that song, Cassie?
Well, yeah, one lyric that stood out was "You're my perfect little punching bag."
That's right. and the rest.
Yeah.
Now that to me is just when Bettina brought that to my attention. I mean, we just la along with songs, don't we? Not really thinking about what they mean, but that's really just condoning violence against men. It's okay.
Yeah, and you know, I've heard so many songs over the past few years where I do, you know, pause and look up the lyrics and think, all right, well, the gender's reversed, that would not have worked. And one that comes to mind off the top of my head is a Carrie Underwood song about how she like doing property damage to his car for cheating. I think it's called something like Before He Cheats.
Yeah.
But the music video is all about, keying his car and busting out the windows and everything like that. And when I was researching for the Red Pill and came across what's called the Duluth model, which I don't know if Australia uses the Duluth model.
Oh, yes. Yep. It pops up
do?
often. Yes, it does.
Okay. Yeah. So I was looking at the Duluth model wheel, which listeners should really look it up and read it.
Hey, Cassie, can I just interrupt you and ask you to speak a bit closer into your telephone receiver because you're just fading out a little bit.
Oh, yeah. Sorry.
That's
Is
better.
that better?
That's much better.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah, so if the listeners look up the Duluth model, this is, I guess, a guide or a baseline of what domestic violence shelters use to identify violence in the home. And it's not just physical violence. It could be abuse of the finances or using the kids against the other parent, so parental alienation and things like that. And one of the little pie pieces of this Duluth model talks about property damage and how that is a sign of domestic abuse.
Yes.
And so when I saw this Carrie Underwood music video of tearing up this guy's truck, I was thinking, wow, that wouldn't have been okay if genders were reversed.
Yes.
And I've seen a bunch of different songs like that. Another song that comes to mind is the old 90s hit, what was it? Destiny's Child, I Don't Want No Scrub.
Oh, right, yes.
And, yeah, and I saw some men's rights activists talking about this song on a forum and saying how obvious that song shows that men are success objects. And if it was about, a woman, because what Dr. Warren Farrell, who wrote the book The Myth of Male Power,
yes.
A kind of slogan that he coined that really so succinctly demonstrates the opposite kind of sexist view that men have. So if women are sex objects, he says that men are success objects.
Yeah. I love just about everything Warren Farrell says. He just puts such a great spin on things. And in fact, he's coming on the show, I think, in October sometime.
Oh, great. Yeah, he really kind of made the blueprint for what the men's rights movement is about and what they talk about and want to raise awareness about.
It comes from a very feminist platform as well, so it's not like he's always just been on one side of the fence. He's very, very balanced in his views and puts it forward in a way that I think is really very palatable and it's not confrontational at all.
Yeah, he's really neutral on, he doesn't want a gender divide at all. He wants everyone to listen to each other and have compassion for each other's.
I use a lot of his analogies, and there was one that I really liked that he said, get this right. So I go to a party in my 20s and I'm chatting with a couple of chicks and they go, hey, Warren, what do you want to do when you grow up? And he goes, all I want to do is raise babies. He goes, I would not have a next date with either of those people. It's just not going to happen. That is not sexy. Men seem to be masculine, and that's still a very true thing. And women don't want to hear that men want to raise babies.
Yeah. Oh, and by the way, I just need to correct myself. It's not Destiny's Child. It's TLC, No Scrubs.
Oh, okay. You did a bit of Googling, did you?
Yeah, I just needed to fix that. But yeah, it really is interesting when you start, because so much of the feminist viewpoint is that women are success objects and this is a bad thing, and we need to change this, and we need to call men out if they are, looking at your chest rather than listening to what you have to say and or how you're portrayed in the media, and which is a very confusing message, I think, for a lot of people, not just men, but for women too, because there's so many very proud feminists like Beyonce or Miley Cyrus or Ariana Grande who are very much sexualized kind of personas in their work that they do, and they're more of the pro-sex feminism, whereas there's also kind of the anti-sex feminism. But it can be very confusing for men because you don't know how you should talk to women if they want to be complimented on their looks, or if you are supposed to act like they're wearing, a trash bag. So yeah, but,
Oh
but
no,
when you
it's
start to
yeah. I was at work the other day, and one of our directors walked through, and he, part of the business that I work in, we do recruitment, and he came through and said, "Oh, she looked really great." The candidate that he was dealing with, she was dressed really beautifully, and he said, "Well, I actually can't say that, can I?" Probably not. Hey, but this morning when I woke up, I jumped online to have a look at your presentation for the recent National Coalition for Men's conference that was in San Diego that you spoke at. And the video clip of your presentation actually starts with you crying because I don't know what had happened, but Harry Crouch, who's the NCFM president, I think had just awarded you with something because you had some plaque in your hand. And then you just got so overwhelmed and I started crying. So I think it was about 5 o'clock this morning. I was in in floods of tears watching you crying. What was that moment like, and what really inspired all those tears?
Well, it was very much a full circle moment because the film at that point, so for context, I was in San Diego, this was a little over a week ago, and it was the National Coalition for Men's 40th anniversary celebration conference. And so they had a dozen speakers, and they asked me to give a presentation, and I really wanted to do something fresh and original because I've done so many interviews over the past year, and I really wanted to do something specifically for this audience. And the audience was just members of NCFM, the National Coalition for Men. So it was very much people who care enough about men's issues to be a part of this organization and help finance it to enact change. And so it was a very unique group that I was in. And, I'm not a men's rights activist. I've never called myself one. I still don't call myself one. And, I now, after making the Red Pill movie, I'm no longer a feminist, but I'm also not anti-feminist. I'm simply labelless, if that's possible, if today's world will allow me to be that. So I was speaking to these men's rights activists, these members of NCFM, as the filmmaker who made the Red Pill, which really did kind of give them a new stage to talk about their issues, or a new awareness to what they've been working on for 40 years, their 40th anniversary.
Wow.
And so they have experienced on such a larger scale what I have gone through over the past year with the release of the Red Pill. And so it was a mixture of knowing what they've been through and how I know it has been so much worse for them than it's been for me.
Yeah.
Because firstly, I'm a woman, so I won't ever take the heat as much as a man would have to if he said he was standing up for men's issues or bringing light to these issues. So, but also many of these people had gone through horrific experiences in their life to bring them to this point of being a part of the movement. And so they presented me with the award of bringing gender fairness to the media, which was really so touching because, I've had such a struggle with finding media on my own to be fair towards me. So it was just really nice for them to
they can go and
thank you for
stick
being
that one
fair
up,
to
the
us.
project and Weekend Sunrise, can't you?
Yeah.
In fact, I was chatting with our great mate Karen Strawn on Skype this morning, and Karen, she is very much labelled as a men's rights activist and very anti-feminist. And she also spoke at the conference, at the NCFM conference as well, and she was saying to me that she was a bit disappointed because her presentation got edited out as well. Again, where I don't know why, but people don't want to hear the whole story because it's not so palatable, or it's in some way it's we're not just ready to hear the whole truth, I think. But it's I wanted to ask you also, given unpalatable, the Red Pill also had at least 100 hours of stuff that didn't come to the screen because Well, that would just make for a very, very long movie. I've actually seen The Red Pill now, Cassie, I think 7 times, and it's a 2-hour movie. So
Oh,
I'm
wow.
pretty indoctrinated, and but it's a great one.
I love hearing those stories. I've heard so many people say that they watched it 10. I heard one person say they watched it 20 times, and I'm just thinking, oh man, that's amazing, because I can't imagine watching a film 20 times in 1 year, because it's only been out for 1 year.
Oh, well, have you never
20
seen?
times
Have
in
you
1
never
year.
seen The Bridges of Madison County? Like, you know, I've seen that at least 50 times, as well as Grease and Dirty Dancing. You know, they're movies
Yeah.
that. But
In 1 year, though?
oh,
That's a
in
lot
my
for 1 year.
lifetime. But now this 100 hours of footage is being released in bite-sized chunks, like every week, that people can get hold of, which is great. I've been watching all of them, Cassie, and I really loved the Paul Elam and Warren Farrell interview that they did together. That was really, really good. I loved that. But can you just remind people where they can, number one, get access to the movie, and then also to the release, the release of the extra footage as well?
Sure. So if you're in Australia, the film is not banned. You can watch it. You can access it. That's one of the difficulties of all these papers printing that the Red Pill was banned. It was banned from certain theaters. That is true. So Dendy Cinemas and Palace Cinemas removed it from their screens, but it's not banned from Australia. So you as an Australian can watch it. And if you go to theredpillmovie.com, that's where we have all of our links set up, so you can find it on many different platforms. But just to rattle off a few, you can find it on YouTube, which we were the top-selling movie in Australia back in June when I was leaving Australia, when I was flying away. I heard
Thanks
that it was the
again,
top-selling
Sunrise
movie.
and the Project, for your
Yes.
unwitting publicity.
Yeah, so that's on YouTube, and there's also Google Play, and there's Vimeo, and Amazon. I believe Amazon Prime in Australia it's also accessible on there. iTunes. So a lot of different websites. Pretty much anywhere you watch films, you can watch it, except for Netflix. Netflix was the only platform that adamantly declined.
Which is really unusual, because they've brought some really controversial stuff to the screen on Netflix. So I'm surprised that they didn't get on board with that, and disappointed.
Yeah, I am, and I'm also, I go with what I'm given, and so I'm very happy to be on all the other platforms, and Netflix, it's their loss, I guess, because I think it could have done really well on there. So...
Now, Cassie, can you believe we've only got 11 minutes left of the show before I hand the reins over to the very delightful and divine Ken Lyons? Now, Ken Lyons, his program, His Health, is really, really important. He's going to be talking to us today about plastic bottles, I understand. But Ken is an ex-pharmacist and does more in the community, Cassie, than most people I know. And Ken's about to turn 93 years old. So a beautiful example of an amazing human being who happens to be a man as well. That is so inspiring. But I wanted to also just... We'll come back after this little break, but I was reminded on the weekend of the vulnerability of people, and it does come onto my radar all the time because I work a lot in suicide prevention, but an 18-year-old boy who recently attempted to kill himself came onto my radar because he's really still not getting the help that he needs or the recognition of his state of mind. And I was very fortunately connected with him and had a beautiful conversation with him for a long period of time. And his mates from school this very minute have just sent me an email, which I'm going to read. Hi, Rae, and I won't say who's writing me the email for confidentiality. On behalf of all of this person's mates, I wanted to say a massive thanks for what you did for him the other day. I think we all were surprised at how well he responded to you and how much he opened up, as he has never opened up anywhere near that much to any of us. So thank you so much for your time for that. Thanks. Which It's really
Wow.
quite touching, which kind of leads me into the piece that I want to play now, Cassie, because at the end of your speech at the Coalition conference, you're talking about the importance of connection and people that have connected to you. And many people don't know that you're quite an introvert. And you recently have recorded your first TED Talk, which is going to be released in November, I understand.
Yes, yeah.
And
Very
can't imagine the conniptions you went through doing that.
Yeah.
But here's a little piece from you, which I absolutely love, that talks about the importance of connection. So just stay on the line with me, and we'll be back right after this.
So I'm going to end with this. When I was doing when Warren worked his magic to set up that I could do a TEDx talk, which was so incredible, and I really do hope that what I set up there, it's an entirely different speech. I didn't give it to you right now. But I hope my TEDx talk does really go out online and open eyes and minds to new people to these ideas. But the thing is, and you may not be able to tell this, but I am terrified of public speaking. And I didn't realize how terrified until I was having to prepare for this TEDx talk. And I didn't want to do it, and I almost quit a few times because I thought, I'm introverted, I don't need the attention, I don't want the attention, I'm overwhelmed with how much attention I'm getting already, and I really didn't want to put myself through that. I didn't know if I could handle it, and I really didn't want to bomb and then, be a failure case just to give more ammo to people who already are, firing at me. But all the letters I received of people watching the film, thanking me that this was produced and released on a wide scale, worldwide online. I printed out some of the most impactful letters I got, and I brought those with me to the green room before I went on the TEDx stage, and I read through them. Some of them were handwritten, some of them were emails that I printed out, but just so many different stories. And so I just wanted to read one for you right now because there's just too many to go into all of them. But here's one letter I printed out and I took with me to the TED Talk. And I just told myself, it's going to be terrifying to stand on stage, but I'm not standing for me. I'm standing for those people who can't stand there themselves. And so here's one of those letters. Dear Cassie, English isn't my first language, but I hope I can make myself clear. A while back, I saw the red pill, and I felt that I have to thank you. Thank you so much for making this movie. Thank you for showing a seemingly fair and balanced view from both MRAs and feminists. Skipping the entire sob story, I have been struggling with depression. Approximately a month ago, I was at the darkest place I've ever been. I went into the kitchen and I took out one of my kitchen knives. I brought it out to my living room and with a pen marked my femoral artery. I figured I'd watch one last movie before I took my life. I don't really remember how I stumbled onto the red pill, but it was going to be the last movie I ever saw. Somewhere along the way, watching your film, I changed my mind. The very next day, I went to the hospital and admitted myself to the psychiatric ward. Now I'm in therapy, working hard to improve my life. If it wasn't for the movie and an extension of it, if it wasn't for you, I wouldn't be alive today. There's no way I can repay you for that But you have my utmost gratitude. I wish you all the best in life, and thank you again.
Oh, Cassie Jaye. How are you feeling?
Well, yeah, getting out the tissues.
Oh, gee, it's I'm as I said before, I hear these stories every day of my life, but never fails to just slam you in the face and go, this stuff is so important, and that we're recognizing that everybody matters, everybody. Yeah. And I really hope that person that wrote to you is still managing well also.
Yeah, me too.
Sorry. Thank
you for playing that.
Now, we are getting to the end of the show, and I will check in with you later as I always do. And I really hope you can come back another time, and we can talk. we can talk more about this stuff. And I'm really keen to see your TED Talk, because that's such a great achievement as well. But look, anyone who would like, we love feedback. Love feedback. So you can join Cassie Jaye on Facebook if you just type in the red pill. Is that right, Cassie?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yep, you can join the Facebook page, so you'll get all the updates there. So all of the unscreened stuff that ended up on the cutting room floor, Cassie actually went in with a broom and she swept it all up, and she got some sticky tape. You probably call it sellotape over there. She stuck it all together and made it all again. But for me, you can contact me at on Facebook. That's Presenting Rae Bonney. Or here in Australia, some of our conversation today may have brought up some feelings for people. And if you do need to get in contact for some extra support, you can phone Lifeline on 131114. That's 131114, or the suicide callback service, which is 1300 659 467, and of course 000 for emergency services. And I think in your country there, Cassie, it's 999, isn't it?
It's actually +1.
Okay. So for people that are phoning in, listening in from the United States, did you say 999 +1?
Are you meaning calling to the U.S.? Sorry.
No.
I don't know.
No, if anyone's in trouble, they need to phone emergency services. Police, ambulance.
Oh, I don't. Well, it's 911 for the emergency.
911. That's the one that we hear. So, absolutely amazing talking to you. Thank you so much. And the time in the United States must be about 8 p.m. Is that right?
That's right. Mm-hmm.
Okay. Well, you go and have a lovely evening. Getting back to what you were doing, but you take care of yourself, okay? And hopefully, I will see you next year at the next International Men's Issues Conference. I think it's Karen Strawn tells me it's going to be in Canada.
Oh, yeah, I haven't even looked into that yet.
Yes. So hoping to get a gig there. So, but we'll talk before then. Thank you, Cassie, and thank you for your amazing work.
Thank you, Rae. Thanks for having me on.
Okay, we'll speak to you soon.
Right. Bye.
That was Cassie Jaye, award-winning film and documentary maker, feminist turned into, well, still a feminist, but a lot more liberal around men's issues.